What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the Playmakers Corner podcast. I'm your host for today, Simon Villanos, aka Coach V. And Happy New Year's. It is January 2nd, 2026, when I am recording this. So this is technically the first episode recorded in the new year. Make sure you check out Cody and Gino's episodes from last week, but they were technically recorded in 2025. So like I said, Happy New Year's. And we are a couple months, really, I would say maybe a month or so away from the start of the 2026 women's college flag football season here, and it's going to be super exciting. We're going to cover as many teams as possible. We're going to do a weekly recap. We're going to do rankings as well of the top 25 teams in the country, regardless of division and classification, so JUCO, NAIA, NCAA. We won't include club teams in that rankings, but we'll include plenty of other teams, and it won't just be myself, Cody, and Gino voting on those, but we are hoping to get some other media members involved in that voting process as well. As of right now, we have a couple alums, some players, some former players who played women's college flag football who will be voting on that as well, just to add a little bit more legitimacy to it all, you know. So really excited about that. But on this episode, we are going up north for the most part, North Midwest, and we're going to talk about a number of teams here from a couple different levels. We're going to talk about NAIA Graceland going into year 2. We're going to talk about Benedictine, not the one in Arizona that Gino did a preview on, but the one in Illinois that is also entering year 2, their D3 program. And then we're going to talk about a new program out of Indiana, Purdue Northwest. They are a Division 2 program. And on these previews, for the teams that have already played before, we are going to talk about last season. We're going to recap that. We're going to talk about some departures from the roster or coaching staff, some additions as well. And then we're going to talk about the upcoming season for the new program here in Purdue Northwest. We're going to talk about their coach, the roster, and I don't think we have the schedule just yet here, but that's okay. We'll still talk about the team regardless. And then, once again, I say this every episode, but if I mispronounce any name, I apologize. Please reach out to us at Playmakers Corner so that we can make sure that we say that correctly once the season goes on. And of course, coaches who are out there, if you have any information that you could provide us on your team, for us, we really just need rosters and schedules, updated rosters and schedules, then we would appreciate that so that we could start these previews as the season is just about a month away. Shout out the teams that reached out to us last week and got us some information there. Without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into it and talk about some football. Okay, so now it is year 2 for Graceland under head coach Aaron Richardson and assistant coach Caitlin Shannon. Last year went 13-9, which is the best the program has ever done. And really, I mean, when you look at the past history of Graceland, you have a couple of seasons, really just one season, because I think they were supposed to start in 22, got started in 23. It just really wasn't it. But in 2025, they got going. Sorry, I meant 23-24, but then in 2025, they got going here, and you know, they did pretty all right here, 13-9, that is a winning record. Basically, I would consider this year 1 for the program here, 13-8 in the regular season, 4-6 in conference here. Let's go ahead and look at that schedule to start. They would start on a 3-game winning streak, beating Cotty 18-12, Bethel 40-21, and Heston 25-6. They would then lose a tough one to Southwestern 19-13, and then that would begin a skid against William Woods and Ottawa before bouncing back with a win over Cotty 19-8, and then losing another tough one to Siena Heights 27-7. They would then get back on a winning streak, beating Benedictine, who we're going to talk about later here, 32-0, and then beating Rockford, who we already talked about on a previous preview, 26-12. They would then lose to Midland and K-Dub here. In April, though, they would find more success against Campbellsville, getting a pretty big win here. I think this is probably, if I really look at it, I think this is probably their best win, at least against a quality opponent. Up to this point was their best win over Campbellsville, 25-20. That's a good one right there. And then once again, beating Benedictine 41-0. They would then play Milligan, and that one would be unfortunate. They would lose 46-26, but would bounce back with wins over Siena Heights and St. Mary before playing Baker and losing. They would then play Rockford, beating them 48-8. Bryan and Stratton, a junior college, but a good one at that, 18-12. And then they would beat Pratt Community College 33-7. They would go to the KCAC tournament here, making the postseason, but would lose in the quarterfinals to Baker 38-0. We had them ranked as the number 12 team in the country at the end of the year, and I don't believe they would end up going to the NAIA tournament at the end, which, by the way, now that on the NAIA level it's invitational, things would be a little bit different. You have to be top 10, top 8 to make the invitational, so they were just outside of that if they were going to do it last year. But going into this year, like I said, for us, we had them 12th, which isn't bad at all. I think for a first-year program, that's pretty decent. They rose a pretty significant amount as the season went on here, from near the bottom of the rankings to just passed into the top half of our rankings. So like I said, not a bad year at all. And really, when you look at this roster, they're not losing a whole lot. Now, there was an interesting storyline last season. So at some point around, like, I would say the midway-ish point, at least of their season, one of their assistant coaches, Caitlin Shannon, who did play quarterback in the past back in Nevada, would suit up again and would coach and quarterback here. And so she did a pretty decent job. Was not bad at all. You know, got in there and was very productive. The offense got going a little bit more here, and they're able to kind of do more of what they wanted. Now, obviously, going into this next season, she will be returning to the sideline. I don't know what her eligibility and whatnot looks like, but she did throw for, at least in the stats that they did keep, 721 yards and 6 touchdowns in the games that she was able to play in. But she's back to the sideline as an assistant OC, and, you know, they do bring in a couple quarterbacks, which we'll talk about later. And then these are some other players that, there are only 2 other players that were not listed on the roster. That's as of today, January 2nd. I do not see them listed on the roster, but they were on the roster last season. And right now, that is Caitlin Valero, as well as Jazaria Taylor, which is tough because Jazaria Taylor was one of their better athletes last season, just playing all over for them. So definitely going to miss some of that speed there. But they add a lot of players. They add 12 more players to their core, which is really healthy numbers when you think about it. And there's a lot of quality players in this freshman recruiting class that will help stack onto the success they had last season here. And so let's talk about these new additions. I'm just going to go down the line here. I'm not going to talk about every single freshman in depth, but I'm going to highlight a couple for sure. Starting with Emily Bieri, listed as a quarterback from Ruskin in Florida, played for Sumner High School, was semi-productive over there, and obviously we know how Florida flag football is, so bringing in another quarterback into the room here. They also bring in another quarterback in Carissa Garcia, a decorated QB from California, playing for multiple clubs out there, and she just possesses great arm talent. You know, throws a very smooth football and throws with good timing as well here. Like I said, tore it up on the club level over there in California, playing for multiple teams, and if I had to pick, is probably a player that I would pick as the favorite to start out of the group of players that they bring in here, the freshman QBs that they bring in, that is. So we'll see about that, but that's a huge pickup for them, getting a Carissa Garcia. Now, I'm going to be a homer for just a minute here, but they also bring in Sadie Lee, a 5'11 safety here from right here in Colorado. Went to Valor Christian, and I actually got to cover her and watch a couple of her games live, so I'm very familiar with Sadie Lee. And you could actually check out some previous Playmakers Corner episodes where we covered some of her games here. But on the season, in her senior season, the 5'11 DB/linebacker had 137 flag pulls, 8 interceptions, receptions and a monster 51 pass deflections. She was a beast for Valor Christian, and like I said, I got to cover her both in, I want to say in the Summer League as well as her senior year. The big game that really stood out to me that I got to watch, which like I said, you could check out if you look back at previous episodes, but I watched a game where she played an overtime game against TCA, one of the powers here in Colorado, and in overtime, she got the game-winning interception. There are just not many 5'11 safety linebacker hybrids that play like Sadie here, and she plays at a very high level for them, and that's definitely somebody that you could see getting in the mix there for Graceland, as, you know, now they have a couple more athletes, and they don't need as many players to play both ways as they did in the past, and so I definitely expect somebody like a Sadie Lee to get up in there and go contribute and make something happen. They also bring in Sierra Flores. They bring in Yanaya Matos, another quarterback, this time from Illinois. They bring in Michaela Brown, I believe from the East Coast, if I had to say correctly. They bring in Sydney Gando, who I think is going to be big time for them. Very productive senior on both sides of the ball, who displayed great ball skills, just immediately bringing some crazy catches off the bat, paired with good speed. I think she could be a really nice linebacker to plug and play for them. She was the defensive player of the year for her team over in California, is where she played. And like I said, she was very productive. 730 receiving yards, 9 touchdowns on offense, but on defense, 101 flagpoles and 11 interceptions. Another player that could be a plug-and-play person and, you know, could take some of the pressure off of those athletes who have been playing both ways. Also bring in Takiria Thomas, Ava Fiore, Layla Finley, Kayla Rhea, and then last but not least, they bring in Jada, I think it's Lamy, who's a great athlete from Canada who played for Halton Fire, a club team over there. Should be another player who I think can immediately contribute at either wide receiver or DB and helps replace some of the production that they do lose, which is not a lot, but, you know, you have plenty of options here that could hop in there and replace those snaps for them. And then last but not least, they are getting a defensive coordinator from Colorado, Randy Lee here. He coached for Valor Christian, so I have definitely seen his defenses before, and they're pretty scary. They're pretty good. But, you know, that's another coach that you are adding to a staff as they fill that out. And he may or may not be related to Sadie Lee. I am not actually sure on that. But I do know him as a coach, and I know what he's been able to produce, at least right here in Colorado in our state. So definitely looking forward to seeing him take over that defense over at Graceland. And looking forward to see what that looks like here in 2026. So there you go there. A lot of new additions, but you know, we got to talk about the players they bring back, because they definitely bring back a lot of players. And let's go ahead and start with this one here. Shyla Barrios played some QB last season and was a decent dual threat who improved compared to the year before. I remember watching her in her first games against Cotty and then the next two after that, and just noticing that, you know, she looked more composed. She was a better passer, but she did end up hitting a little bit of a rut, and it did seem like Caitlin Shannon would take over down the stretch here at quarterback. But Shyla Barrios would still get playing time, just as more of a gadget player, somebody who, you know, ended up being one of their more important checkdown options because of how shifty she is, because of how creative you could get with her with the ball in her hands. And so going into this next season, it's going to be really interesting. I mean, she's as experienced, she's the most experienced quarterback on this roster. But if you could get a freshman up to speed and keep Barrios at that utility gadget kind of position, then I think Graceland could definitely get creative with what they do. Now, if they start her at quarterback, that is also fine, because you have one of your better athletes at quarterback, and like I said, has experience. Can't go wrong with that. But it helps having options, and I think regardless, you could definitely expect Shyla Barrios to be on the football field when that offense takes the field here in 2026. It's not really somebody that I would recommend taking off the field. Now, they also bring back Delaney Mondino. For us, she was an all-freshman player at DB, but also played receiver And I felt like whenever I watched Graceland games, she was the clear wideout one. She was somebody you wanted to get the ball when you wanted to take a shot, or when you needed somebody to make a catch on a late down. That's who you went to. And so she was big time. I mean, she had flashes throughout her season, and the only reason she didn't make all PMC wide receiver as well is just because, we want to highlight as many freshman wide receivers as we can, as many freshmen as we can, but definitely deserved it at DB. She's a great two-way athlete to bring back, and really a cornerstone of your program. Speaking of cornerstones, they also bring back Grace Jensen, one of their few seniors entering her senior year. She's always been a reliable pass catcher for them. Now, last but not least, I want to mention Kamani Freeman and Mekhi Verdum. I felt like both of these players have a good amount of athleticism here, and last season, they caught my eye, and they made plays in big-time situations, playing both ways, and so it's going to be interesting to see where they play this season for the majority of the snaps here, but definitely some great players to be bringing back to help round out this team. So there you go there, and there's plenty of other players that I did not mention here, but Graceland, they bring back a lot of their players, a lot of the players that started and got very valuable playing experience last season. They lost 3 players, but they gained, another 9 after replacing those 3. And so this team's only going to get better. The majority of the squad comes back. You have a good coaching staff over there that is continuing to build here. At the very least, I expect them to have another winning record. Now, how far they go really depends on the freshmen that they're bringing in. Which of these freshmen could step up, find a role for themselves, and play at a high level. Now, before I talk about those storylines, let's go ahead and look at their schedule. Their first game, and this is as of today, January 2nd, they are going to play on March 5th against Cumberland in Tennessee, and that's a team that I have completed a season preview for, so make sure you check that out there. I view this game as probably a win for them. Now, Cumberland would have played a couple games, I want to say, leading up to this point, but they are a first-year program. Do they have talent? Yes, but I like what Graceland has. I think the defense will definitely be improved, and then offensively, I expect them to be better, no matter who is starting at quarterback. So I like Graceland right here. I think they get the win over Cumberland. Following that, they play Reinhardt, and Reinhardt, I'm just going to be honest, has been a mess on their third head coach, I want to say, in as many years. And as of right now, I have no idea who is on that roster. I'm taking Graceland. Even though they have to go to Georgia and play them, I'm taking Graceland in this win. Then they play Life. I think this game is going to be really close. And I talked about the NAIA Invitational. Look, Life is kind of in that same group or area as Graceland. They need to beat each other to make it into the Invitational at the very least. And so this one's going to be close here. I think I'm probably going to lean Life because they are at home, but don't be surprised if it goes either way. And then they end their road trip against St. Mary's, and that should definitely be a win there. So at worst, I really think they're probably 3-1 at worst, maybe 2-2 at worst if Cumberland really gets you right there. But that's not a bad way to start the season. Then they come back home and they have to host Ottawa. That's even, and this is an Ottawa team that has already went through the gauntlet by the time they play them on March 14th, because Ottawa is playing the likes of Kaiser, they're playing the likes of Wingate, who I did a preview on, and we'll do a preview of Kaiser later on this year. But I think whatever growing pains Ottawa has, by this point, it'll be over, or they know what they need to do to mitigate those things. And so I think that's probably a loss there. Then they play William Woods. William Woods, I'm not really sure. I did a preview on them. I really need to see what's going on with that squad. But at this point, I'm probably leaning Graceland. I think they're just a little bit, well, not a little bit. They're definitely deeper than them this year. And then defensively, I like what Graceland brings to the table. While William Woods, they're replacing a lot of that offense. I think facing a defense that has experience, that is bringing in more players, that's not a recipe for success for William Wood, so I'm going Graceland right there. Then they go ahead and play St. Francis here. Have not looked at the roster too much, but they are a first-year program. I think that should be a win. Then they play Siena Heights. This is kind of a team that gave them some issues last season. Let me go ahead and look this up just so I'm sure here. I mean, lost to them 27-7. Then they would beat them 26-19. Still a close one though. So going into this one, I'm not really sure. Now, here's the thing. Siena Heights, they are bringing in a almost not a brand new team, but they have a lot of new faces. What will be new, though, is the quarterback. I know last season they didn't exactly have the quarterback they wanted to roll out with, and so they were kind of just making do. This season, it's going to be a little bit different, right? And so I'm not sure who to go with. I'm probably going to lean Graceland because they have more continuity. But don't be surprised if this is a loss. Then they play Campbellsville. This is a team that has a lot of continuity. I did a preview on them. I think this is probably a loss right here. But then they play Cotty, and that should be a win. Following that, they play Midland here. Midland beat them, I want to say, the last couple years. Last season, I think, is the only fair matchup to look at. And I think this year it'll be closer. I think if the quarterback play really steps up, then they could beat them here, but they are playing at Midland. For now, I'm going to say that's probably a Midland win. Then they go play Southwestern. I think that's a win right there. They play Bethel. That's another win. Then they play Baker. That's going to be a tough one. I think that's probably a loss, as that's a team that is probably firmly in the hunt for the Invitational. Not even in the hunt. They're in the Invitational process right now, and then they're probably going to be competing for a KCAC title this season. I don't think Graceland is there quite yet, but they're getting close. Then they play Heston, North Central Missouri, Maharishi, I want to say. Those should all be wins before they play their KCAC tournament. And for some reason, it says K-Dub. They're playing them on April 15th. Which is weird because that's in the middle of this KCAC tournament. So I don't know what's going on with all that. I'm actually just going to assume they play K-Dub on the 15th and then the tournament starts on the 24th. And I am probably going to go K-Dub's way. But you know what? Don't be surprised if Graceland steals a win here. Especially, yeah. Don't be surprised, is all I'm going to say for now. This late in the season, if things are really going well, I could definitely see them beating a K-Dub team who has a new head coach this season and is also replacing a lot of players. So there you go. I think this is less games than what they played last season. Now that I'm looking at it, it looks like less games, so there's that. But look, when it comes down to Graceland, I think they're a team that's going to be highly improved here. You know, going into year 2 with Aaron Richardson in that squad, I really like their coaching staff. I think they've done such a good job turning this program around. And that's just in year 1. Now we're settling in. Now we're getting comfortable. This Graceland team could be a dark horse a lot sooner than some teams may expect here. Now, let's go ahead and go to the storylines. I think the big thing is who's going to play at quarterback. Are you going with the veteran Barrios, the dual threat Barrios as well, or are you going to go with one of your freshman quarterbacks? I think it's not crazy to say they start a freshman at quarterback. But now, if they do, how productive is she going to be? However productive the quarterback position is going to be a very good indicator of how good this Graceland squad is. Because like I've always said, if you don't have a quarterback, you really don't have a team. They have options over there at the very least. It's good options. Options that a lot of other teams probably wish they have, but they do not. And so Graceland, they have some decisions to make, but it's not a bad space to be in. On top of that, you have some pass catchers in Mondino and Jensen that you're bringing back. You have some players, some freshmen, and even some players from last year's class who are coming in and could take another step forward as pass catchers. Personally, I think this pass catching group, this wide receiving room, will be very underrated. But I think they could be due for a good season. Now, it depends how the quarterback play is, but I think they have a talented group over there. Now, looking over at the defense, I think another storyline is how good is Randy Lee going to be towards this defense over here. You know, he's a first-year defensive coordinator, at least on the college level. It's a little bit different. I would say coaching against defenses in Colorado is going to be different than coaching against an Ottawa or a Baker, who are very different. I would even say offenses in Colorado from that season are different from, this most recent season here in 2025. So how good is this defense going to be? And how good can they be compared to other squads? Is this a defense that could carry a team to a invitational, right? Can they carry them to wins over top 10 opponents in the country? That's going to be something that's going to be very interesting to see moving forward, because I do think they have the potential. There's a lot of good individual players here on the squad. Now it's going to come down to, can this defense as a unit take that next step forward? Can they go from good to pretty good to elite, right? And we'll see. I think it really depends on if a big-time rusher could step up and consistently, put pressure on the quarterback. Can this defense come away with turnovers and physically out-dominate other teams? I think they have the potential to do so, but can they do that on a consistent basis? We're just going to have to see what happens here. I'm looking at an Ottawa and a Baker, teams that get creative, teams that have the top talent in the country. Can they give those teams some fits? We'll see what happens. But all of that leads to this last storyline, and that is, will Graceland make the Invitational? At least according to our rankings, and we're not doing the rankings for the Invitational. I guess that's something totally different for the NAIA level. But according to our rankings, they would have just been outside last year. And that's not a bad place to be at, considering they're going to be better this season. But they're going to need to beat some teams to make it in. I'm looking at Life. That's a team you absolutely have to beat to make it in. I think with a loss to them, it's going to be tough. Campbellsville is probably another team that's on that list. They're in that same tier. They're trying to get in. That's going to be a team you want to beat. A team like Midland, who is currently, I would say, in the top 10, but could slide out. That's probably a team you would like to beat. And then obviously you have your Bakers, Kansas Wesleyans, Ottawas that you have to beat as well, or that you would like to beat, not have to beat, but you would like to beat. And if you do, I would think they would be in the top 10 if they would beat any of those squads, right? And then on top of that, you got to take care of business. You have some games on here that could be, trap games. I'm looking at Cumberland. I'm looking at William Woods. I'm looking at Siena Heights, right? Who's still a team that you got to beat to get in there. There's some squads here that could definitely be, a team that you could overlook if you're not careful. And so for Graceland, I'm really excited to see how much better they get this season. But after the season they had last year, I think the expectation definitely goes up just a little bit, right? This is a team that could make the Invitational. Now, will they? We will just have to see what happens. It's going to come down to football on the football field and getting it done on the field. You could speculate all you want. You can look at the rosters, highlights, all that stuff, right? Stats. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to, can they execute on the football field and take out teams that could make the Invitational over them? We'll see. Either way, I'm rooting for this squad. Shout out Coach Richardson. Shout out Graceland. Shout out Coach Shannon over there. That's a fine program. We are very excited for them. We're wishing them all the best of luck. Also, shout out our very own Sadie Lee and Randy Lee over there representing Colorado. Wishing them the best of luck this season here in 26, and looking forward to covering them here in the spring. Okay, now moving on, we are going to talk about Benedictine University, the Eagles here out of Illinois. Not to be confused with the Benedictine team that we previewed a couple weeks ago that is from Mesa, Arizona. This team is a D3 team entering year 2. And this will be a little bit of a shorter preview because was not able to find many games, was able to watch some of their game against, I believe it's Rockford, but not the first time, the second time here. So it was really rough trying to find some things here, but according to their schedule, first off, the schedule they have up right now from last season is not accurate. That is their 2025 schedule here. There are some games listed, but there aren't scores listed. So, the schedule I was able to find from last season, I was able to put together from a couple different teams that I know they played, and from looking at their schedule. And, they struggled in year one. They went 0-10, losing to Rockford twice, losing to Bryan and Stratton, losing to Graceland twice, losing to Siena Heights twice, losing to Campbellsville, and losing to Villa Maria here. Now, most of those teams are first-year programs outside of Rockford, who was the same year as them, but a lot of these games just were not super close. And so going into year two, you kind of hope that things will change, but they do lose some players. They lose 4 players, but they do add on 14. So let's start with the departures first, starting with Marilyn Myrick. I want to say she was their quarterback. Got to watch her play in the one game I was able to find online, and she has transferred to Purdue Northwest, who we will actually be talking about after this preview. And so that's tough. She was their starting quarterback, started a lot of the year, I feel, and, she had some potential. She was a good athlete, and whenever you lose a quarterback, that's tough, especially one that, had the rest, 3 years of eligibility left. And so that is a loss of continuity that I think will impact this squad. They also lose Sanaya Shotwell. She, I don't think, transferred, but I was not able to find her on a roster, but she's not on this one, and she was a starter at one of the rushing spots as well as one of the receiving options, and she had really good speed, and so that's going to be tough to replace there. They used her as a rusher a lot, and they did have some 2 rusher looks, but they would drop back the other one, who we'll talk about in a minute, and then rush Shotwell, and so that's tough losing some speed there. And then they also lose Tatiana Wilson. Was not able to find her on another roster, so she's just not part of the team anymore, I assume, but she did get to start at corner, so that's tough, as well as Jacqueline Garrow, who I don't think was the starter for this team, but she's no longer on here. And so that is 4 players they are losing. They do bring in 14, and I did my best looking up, some film and doing some research, but a lot of these girls are locally, from the Illinois area state, right? And so it's just not as developed flag football wise over there, so was not able to find many stats, and was also not able to find much film. But I'm going to go down the line and list all the players that are going to be joining this program that weren't here last year. Like I said, they bring in 14. So starting with Dakota Bowie, they'll bring her in Mina Bridgewater, Alana Curtis, Emily Gonzalez, who I believe is a quarterback, Victoria Halan, Shakayla Henderson, Madison Hoskins, Catherine Kuna, Malone, Maya Myrick, Michaela Phillips, Madeline Stephen Kopso, Shatira William, and then, excuse me if I say this wrong, but Rialankika Zilisak? Like I said, if I said any of these wrong, please feel free to correct me. And by the way, that last player is a quarterback as well. Either way, though, their team does grow, so that's always a good thing, just to have players so that you could continue to play games and have that depth as the season goes on, which I feel like maybe was a little bit of a problem last season. They had a smaller roster, and so they do grow, and that's a good thing. They grow by 10 players, but they do bring back a lot of other players. But there are 2 that I really want to talk about, starting with Hannah Pripusic, I want to say. She was their starting rusher / linebacker last year, and in my opinion had flashes of quality rushes. She could also drop back and play that linebacker spot as well as rusher, but going into this season, I think you definitely prioritize having a good rush. Now, maybe one of these freshmen can do it, or one of these new additions can do it, and could go ahead and fill a rushing spot here, but I don't think it would be a bad thing if you throw in Hannah as a rusher and just let her go get the quarterback. I think there were some really quality plays, that almost happened. And that did happen whenever she just could go full speed at the QB. So we'll see about that. But like her as kind of a player to build around right there. And then they also bring back Leilani Garcia. She's one of the returning receivers who should help out whoever starts at quarterback there. She also played some corner, and I think she has some good instincts on defense, but just needs to get more consistent with playing the ball skills, catching the ball, all that stuff there. But there's definitely some good raw ability there. It's just a matter of refining that ability and getting better, which I'm sure they have with the full off season and a season of experience under their belts. And so they do bring back a lot of who they had last season, the majority, I would say. But it is never easy replacing your quarterback and then replacing one of your fastest two-way players. That's always tough, right? And so going into this next season, I think the big storyline, and I have their schedule pulled up, but it is mostly incomplete here. And actually, before we talk about storylines, let's just go through the schedule real quick. Like I said, incomplete as of right now, it's January 2nd, but they'll play College of DuPage, they'll play Aurora University, Illinois Wesleyan, Illinois College, North Park University, Marion University, and then some of these teams they will play multiple times here. So there you go. They have a couple of spots still open. They'll play Pratt Community College as well. Now, I'm just looking at the roster. They struggled a lot this year. Going into this next season, am I predicting them to have a winning season? I'm not doing that just quite yet. They got a lot to prove. This program needs to take a step forward. I think defensively, I'm not as worried. I think there were flashes last year where it seemed like they could figure it out. But offensively, they just struggled to put points on the board. And losing a quarterback definitely does not help that offense to get better, right? And so it's going to really come down to, okay, can the offense go out there and score and not keep putting our defense back out there, right? Can our offense go be productive? Can our offense score multiple times in a game? Can our offense keep the opposing off the field? That does matter, right? And then that allows the defense to not have as much pressure. Things are a little bit more balanced. Even though they do lose a couple players here, I feel pretty confident that they could get back to where they were at least last season, if not a little bit better. So there you go. But I think the big thing is, can this offense develop into an O that is scoring more? Because last season they just did not score enough to win games. And so we'll see. They didn't win any games as far as I could find here. So I think they're still hunting their first win. But I think that's the key to success. You got to score points to go win games. Defensively, like I said, there are flashes. I think they have a defense who is serviceable and could be, has potential, right? But I don't know if it's exactly a defense that could carry your team into wins. So we will see what happens, right? It's really only their second year. And like I said, they brought in a lot of players. So, and these are players that are still semi-newish to the game, at least compared to other players around the country, right? And so you really never know who could go ahead and step up and have a great season. But either way, rooting for the squad and excited to cover them going into 2026 and their second year as a program. Okay, now moving on, let's talk about a new program, a D2 program, I believe, in Purdue Northwest over in Indiana. This program, entering year one, they will be coached by Micah Lowe, who has a lot of experience in the flag football world, owner and executive director of the Hands Team Academy, which is based out in Chicago, founded the first ever travel girls flag football team in Illinois, and last year at Worlds in Tampa, they finished 5th, which is not bad. That's a very competitive tournament down over there. And so could definitely coach. Also back in 2022, ranked as the 10th best receiver trainer in the U.S., according to USA Top 100, and then currently is the Director of Player Development for the Swedish women's national flag football team. So a lot of proven success here for Michael Lowe. I think he's a great hire for a program that is just getting started and seems very enthusiastic at, developing this program and giving them a great experience over there, but also building a winning program at that. I think they have a great head coach to start with. Now, roster-wise, they got a lot of players. I'm just going to go down the line and list their inaugural roster going into this season here. And like I said, if I mispronounce a name, I apologize. But to start, they bring in, I think it's Isis Harden, a wide receiver from Chicago, Illinois. They bring in a transfer here, who I kind of talked about in the last segment briefly, in Maryland Myrick, listed as a quarterback wide receiver from Illinois, but also went to Benedictine. That is a player that we're going to go into depth a little bit more here in a minute. They bring in wide receiver Cherish Sanders from Chicago, Illinois. They bring in Jasmine Nichols from Indiana. She's a sophomore, listed as wide receiver. They bring in another transfer here, a DB wide receiver, originally from Illinois, but played her freshman year at William Woods. That is Emma Anderlich. Got to watch her play a little bit, and we'll talk about more about her in a little bit here. They bring in a grad student in Alexis Wade, a center linebacker from Indiana. They bring in Amari Gonzalez, a wide receiver from Illinois. They bring in Takaria, aka TK Burkhalter, from Chicago, Illinois. They bring in Olivia Washington from Chicago, Illinois. She's a quarterback wide receiver. Also listed from Benedictine, but I don't think she played for them last season, so interesting. They bring in Kristen Woods from Chicago, a linebacker safety. They bring in Haley Howell, running back linebacker DB from Indiana, who's a sophomore. They bring in Nairi Waller, a rusher DB from Chicago. They bring in Kennedy Westbrook, a rusher wide receiver running back from Chicago, who's also a freshman. And then they bring in Cheyenne Lipscomb, a rusher running back from Cleveland, Ohio. And then they bring in Jocelyn Hale, a wide receiver running back linebacker from Chicago, Illinois. And then last but not least, at linebacker, they bring in Morgan Ellis from Chicago, who is also a freshman. Now, was able to find much more film on these players here. Let's start with the transfer, starting with Maryland Myrick, quarterback wide receiver from Benedictine. She's probably slated to be their starter at quarterback. I believe on the roster, she is the only one outside. Well, no, just kidding. Olivia Washington's listed at quarterback. But those two are the only players listed at quarterback. Myrick obviously having more experience there. Last season for Benedictine, their offense struggled. I do think she's a good athlete, though, and flashed some good, great natural dual threat abilities. But I do think in a different system, she may be able to thrive even more. Definitely a player to keep an eye on considering her college experience, but I think as of right now, she's probably going to be the starter for Purdue Northwest going into their first season. And so it's going to be interesting to see if she could develop or just be more productive in a different system, which I think is definitely possible. They also bring in Emma Anderlich from William Woods. Like I said, got to watch her play for that William Woods team, part of the Fierce Freshies, one of the best freshman group of women's college flag football players ever. And I believe last season, the only group of women's college flag football players to have an all-freshman starting lineup. She was productive when she got rotated in and playing a lot of DB there, where she got 21 pulls and 6 pass deflections, as well as 3 interceptions at her time there. She's going to be a nice player to have in the fold over at Purdue Northwest, just giving you another player with experience from last season who can help guide a younger team. Now, as far as high school recruits, there were 4 players that I was able to find clips or highlights of that really caught my eye, starting with Takaria Burkhalter assaulter. I thought she had really good ball skills with good speed and agility. She'll be a nice DB to have in their rotation. They also bring in Kristen Woods. Looks like somebody who could be a pretty decent linebacker safety hybrid, who could be moved around a defensive formation, has good agility and good hands is what I saw. So there you go. They bring in Morgan Ellis, listed at a linebacker, and I think that's where she's probably going to play, but I really like her sideline-to-sideline movement and just her knack for finding the football. In the clips I was able to find from her travel squad, she's just very aware over the middle and could definitely be somebody who gives opposing offenses issues when it comes to getting the ball over the middle because she will be on the prowl. And so I really like her as a defensive player, as somebody who could go ahead and, set the tone early for this squad. But the player I am really excited to watch here coming out of high school is Jocelyn Hale, a wide receiver, running back, linebacker. She has some serious foot speed and is an explosive player who can be the wide receiver one on this young team that is looking for weapons. It is notable that she was offered by Ottawa, who doesn't offer a lot of people, but she passed that up to play for Purdue Northwest, and I think could be a big contributor for this team for years to come. She's just somebody that you want to get the ball in her hands, because when that happens, good things happen. Full stop, period. And I expect her to go ahead and make an impact on both sides of the football. She's a good enough athlete where, you need her speed out there to go ahead and tip the scale and win games. And so I'm very excited to see her ball out for Purdue Northwest. I think she could be an absolute star for them. To me, just watching some of her clips and highlights reminds me a lot of Kayla Burrows, the athlete out of Weber who played for them for a year or two back a couple of years ago. They have very similar games and builds and all that stuff there. And so really excited to see what Jocelyn Hale does for this Purdue Northwest team. Now, as of right now, their schedule has not come out. I'm sure they're going to play teams that are nearby in Indiana and whatnot, as well as I'm sure they're going to make a trip to Illinois to go ahead and play some teams there, since they have such a connection there with a lot of their players being from that Chicago area, right? But I feel good about this Purdue Northwest team. I think they have a good coach over there. I think they have some good experience mixed in there with just good raw talent. Myrick and Anderlich, we'll see how they do for that program, but we know kind of what their floor already is. So, that's definitely a good thing, just to know that, there's somebody to go ahead and speak up and help lead a team, having been there before playing women's college flag football. But then the rest of these players, these are players that I think are really just getting started. A lot of them, I don't think there's any of them that have played flag football probably for longer than 4 or 5 years. And compared to the rest of the country, specifically players from Florida, that doesn't seem like a lot of time. And so I think a lot of these players are just scratching the ceiling, and they're going to be a very good team from the things I've been able to see on their social media. And, granted, it might be propaganda, right? The training videos and whatnot, but it looks good. They are getting in some pretty serious work out there and working hard and doing these drills at a pretty decently high level. And so those are drills, though. At the end of the day, it comes down to playing football on the field. At the very least, I don't know who this team will play specifically, but I don't think it's surprising to predict them to have a winning record. I think they have a lot of talent. It's just going to be really interesting to see how this team grows and gels together. This team has not played together yet. And so probably the biggest storyline, and this is a storyline that goes for any first-year program, but how much chemistry are they going to have right off the bat? How long is it going to take to find players who have that chemistry, who bring that energy, all the things that you want in a winning program, right? And how is that going to look as a younger team playing against other teams who may have a little bit more experience? Either way, I like the experience they have. Like I said, they have a good coach. That alone goes a long way, but he's also done a good job recruiting some great players here as well. And so I'm very excited to see how this team develops and gets better together. And shout out to Coach Lowe and shout out to Purdue Northwest. Definitely rooting for them this upcoming season and looking forward to covering them in their inaugural 2026 campaign. All right, and that will do it for this episode. Thank you so much for rocking with us. We have way more season previews coming out as the 2026 women's college flag football season is fast approaching, just about a month out from now. So make sure you peep our previous episodes. We are trying to cover as many teams as possible, including the NAIA teams that we have always started with and that we have covered in great detail the last couple years. And so we are super excited to talk about more junior college teams, NAIA teams, and then NCAA teams going into this next season. And so, once again, if you're a coach or somebody involved in one of these programs, feel free to send us your information. We really just need roster schedules, and then if you as coaches want to tell us a couple players to really look out for, then we will make sure to relay that in our previews. We want to make sure we spotlight as many programs as possible before the season starts. And then once the season starts, we will be doing our first ever top 25 women's college flag football programs in the entire country. Yeah, so not just NAIA like we've done the last couple years, but we are also going to include NCAA and junior colleges. The only teams we won't be including for now is club, as we do want to encourage more teams to, go ahead and make their squads a varsity team, an official varsity team, and start giving out scholarships and more opportunities to these athletes who will take advantage of those opportunities given, opportunities that they've worked really hard for. So there you go there. Once again, make sure you check us out on our social media at Playmakers Corner. Show us some love. Give us some information if you have some. We are also releasing, and this is more for our Colorado audience, but we are releasing a record book of all the great records that have been set in the first 2 years of girls high school flag football here in Colorado. So for the first couple years that it's been official, that is, not including the pilot years, unfortunately. And we're going off of max preps with those and posting those exclusively at Playmakers Corner, with the hope that Chassa eventually picks it up and keeps their own official record book. But for now, we will keep the girls high school flag football record book, and so you can find those on our Instagram at Playmakers Corner. There should be a highlight with all of our posts there. But make sure you check out all of our other season previews, and be sure to look out for more season previews. We'll be going 2 episodes a week, or at least for this week, and then we will see where we are at as far as other programs go next week here. But until next time, I'm your host, Simon Villanos, aka Coach V, and I'll catch you later.